Hello, welcome to our webinar, The New Requirements of EN 55032 and EN 55035 for CE marking in Europe. Thank you for joining us. This webinar is being given by MET Laboratories. MET is a leader in the testing of electrical and electronic equipment for environmental hardiness, product safety, and electromagnetic compatibility. MET operates world-class labs in Baltimore, Maryland, Santa Clara and Union City, California, Austin, Texas, and also runs operations in China, Taiwan, and Korea. This webinar will run about 30 minutes with an additional 15 minutes set aside for questions and answers. Due to the number of registrants, all attendees will have their phones muted. If you have a question, please type it in the questions area of your control panel. We will attempt to answer all questions at the end. If you're having technical difficulties, you can contact us the same way, and we'll try to resolve it quickly. Just a quick note on other upcoming events. Tomorrow in the Bay Area in Santa Clara, there will be a talk on changes not only in the EU, but also in Korea for approvals for IT and audio-video equipment. And then also in the Bay Area, there will be a EMC and wireless design and testing seminar on March 8th. And there are a number of additional webinars that are also scheduled and posted on metlabs.com. So if you navigate there and click on the News and Events tab, you'll see everything that we have available, and most of it is free. Today's webinar is being presented by Assad Bajwa. Assad is MET's EMC Lab Director. At this point, I will hand over the presentation to Assad.
Hello folks, welcome to our webinar. Barnaby, thank you for organizing this. As Barnaby mentioned, my name is Assad. We're going to talk today about EN 55032-35. As we go through the presentation, we'll briefly talk about the new EMC directive, which is 2014/30/EU. We'll look at, again, briefly what the changes going from the older version, which was the 2004 version versus 2014 version. And then we will continue our discussion about the EN 55032 and CISPR 35, which is emission and immunity for the new product category designed by the European Union for the multimedia equipment, which is being referred in the standard now. We'll talk about what standards being replaced there, and as we talk about EN 55032 and 35, we'll keep doing the comparison from the Korean version of the CISPR 32 and CISPR 35, which go by KN 32 and KN 35, and we'll explore what the changes are and how they will impact your products as they go through testing for the Korean market. The new EMC directive, which is, as I said, is 2014/30/EU. It basically has replaced the 2004 version. It's already out there. The drop deadline date for moving to the new EMC directive is April 20th, meaning after this date, manufacturers who are putting their products on the market will no longer be able to declare conformance to the 2004 version of the EMC directive. So past April 20th of 2016, which is this year, the manufacturer of the new equipment who are planning to put their products in the market in Europe, they will have to reference in their documentation, in their letter of compliance, so on and so forth, they will have to reference to the 2014 version. There are few changes. We will talk about some of those changes as we go through this presentation. However, the essential requirements in the EMC directive, which are predominantly that a product shall not cause harmful radiated emission to the other products in the environment intended for. And similarly, the other essential requirement is that the product should have enough immunity developed in them so that when there are harmful immunity signals, emission signal coming from other products, which will become a susceptibility phenomena for the device in hand, the device has the immunity to withstand those susceptibility signals. So those essential performances, those essential requirements predominantly remain the same. There is some change in the verbiage, but it's not very significant. Another key point to remember is that even though the standard, even though the EMC directive name has been changed to 2014-30/EU, however, the standard in the official journal, which we normally refer to as OJ, remain the same. Whatever the changes in the standard are as part of the normal process, like moving forward from CISPR 22 to CISPR 32 and moving from CISPR 24 to CISPR 35, those are part of the normal process. As the technology evolves, accordingly, the standard writing bodies try to catch up with the change in technology to keep the standard up to date. So those changes got nothing to do with the EMC directive change itself. There is more talk in the EMC directive about how the notifying body will have more significant role. So as we go through this presentation, we'll look at that a little bit more detail. Talking about EMC directive, this new directive got in picture in March 2014. The European Commission published this as a recast for the CE marking directive to align the European Commission new legislative framework, or commonly referred as NLF. Under the NLF, economic operators can provide one single declaration of conformity per product, and the labeling and traceability requirements are pretty much same across the product. So in a nutshell, the effort to recast the new EMC directive has predominantly to meet the NLF, or a new legislative framework, with the thought that there will be a single declaration of conformity for various applicable directives, so on and so forth. So from the technical perspective, there have not been too many changes. There are a few changes, which we'll talk briefly. However, in essence, for a large number of manufacturers who already have their products on the market and who plan to put the new products on the market, for a large number of manufacturers, the changes will be predominantly hovering around declaring the DOC one more time, referencing to the new EMC directive on their declaration of conformance, looking at the official journal for the harmonized standards to ensure there are no changes which may apply to their products since they last tested their products, and then accordingly self-declare the product, look at the labeling requirement one more time to ensure the labeling requirements are still in alignment with the new language in the standard, which is predominantly the same. And in the cases, some cases, Article 18 will apply, where the manufacturer would have to very carefully look the operator's instruction or operator's manual and any technical instruction to operate the equipment. Some of those languages have changed, which may require you to do a little bit more of the paperwork on your side. However, predominantly, the change for you would be to redeclare as part of your self-declaration, referencing to the new EMC directive and modifying any applicable documentation, and ensuring no changes from OJ will impact your product. If there have been some changes to the standard, whether the standard name has changed, standard revision has changed, or if there are standard replaced by a newer standard, like example would be CISPR 22 being replaced by CISPR 32. In those cases, you will have to go back to your test lab of choice, work with them, have a new report issued to the new standard or modified standard. In some cases, wherever there is a gap between the last testing you guys have done versus where the standards stand today, you may have to do some additional testing to ensure your product remain in compliance and have your product back to the compliance and do the self-declaration again to ensure you are meeting the CE mark requirement. While we're talking about the new EMC directive, let's keep in mind there are some exclusions based on the new EMC directive. We pretty much know, I have summarized on this slide to clearly state what equipment is not covered by or excluded from the new EMC directive. Predominantly, first thing is the RNTDE directive and or RED directive. So the equipment, radio equipment, which falls under RNTDE and or RED directive, that's excluded from the EMC directive. Another thing to remember, we could have a separate conversation or a webinar about the changes as we go from RNTDE directive to RED directive. In a nutshell, many other changes taking place. However, basically they are removing telecommunication terminal equipment and putting it with the EMC directive, so on and so forth. So that makes it, in a nutshell, RED directive. There have been many other changes which comes from the perspective of the enhanced role for notifying bodies, so on and so forth. In a similar way, the aeronautical equipment, the radio amateur equipment, and the discrete components are obviously not covered by the EMC directive. One thing which the question comes always to the mind, and often people get confused with that, if the military and defense equipment is covered by the EMC directive, is excluded from the EMC directive. Reality of the matter is the military equipment is not excluded from the EMC directive. So if there is a military equipment which is going into Europe, it has to meet the European military defense requirements, but at the same time, it will have to meet the minimum requirement to ensure it meets the CE mark requirement as well. So they have to go both hand in hand there. I mentioned earlier the role of the notifying bodies. In the past, with the older EMC directive, the 2004 version, the role of notifying body was there. It was a little bit vague in many cases. In essence, in general, a manufacturer does not necessarily always need a notifying body. A manufacturer can choose to go through the notifying body. The notifying body, as they stand today under the new EMC directive, for us in USA, they are covered by the conformity assessment body process through NIST. NIST works with under the MRA with the Europe. So the conformity assessment bodies in USA predominantly act as a notifying body for the manufacturer who are putting their products to the European market. So once the manufacturer selects a notifying body works with the manufacturer, review their documentation, review their TCF, and based on that, issue what is called a note of opinion. Manufacturer takes the note of opinion, and based on that, it makes it part of their documentation and do the self-declaration on a piece of paper like they always do, referencing to the new EMC directive. A little bit more on the notifying body responsibilities. There have been more clarity added to the role of the notifying body, their responsibilities. In the past, it was not very clearly defined. One more point I would like to make before I go into the responsibilities for notifying bodies is that, excuse me, in the past, with the older EMC directive, manufacturers were required to put the notifying body number as part of the CE mark declaration on the product. However, with the new EMC directive, that requirement is no longer there. Manufacturers just need to put the CE mark logo on the product, and the notifying body number will find its way in the DOC, the Declaration of Conformity. Coming back to the responsibilities for the notifying body has to continuously monitor the conformity, the certificates they have issued. They will have to work with the manufacturer, provide them the information about changes to the harmonized standard which may impact a manufacturer's product. get feedback from the manufacturer, how they are ensuring that once their product has been certified and how the harmonized standard change is being taken care, being addressed just by documentation or in some of the cases by getting the test report done. At the end of the day, notifying body has to ensure the product remains in compliance. Notifying body will also be working with the notifying authorities to keep them in the loop, inform them if any certificates being rescinded, being removed, if any of the work they are doing, they are subcontracting, and they need to work with the surveillance authorities where applicable, market surveillance authorities where applicable, to ensure the market surveillance function is moving forward correctly. Notifying body has additional responsibility to work with the other notifying bodies to keep them in the loop about any refusal restrictions or if they are suspending any of the certificates they have already issued. So each one of the notifying bodies in the loop related to a product which is being refused or being restricted. That was about some of the major changes which came with the EMC directive. Again, the date there is to switch to new EMC directive in your documentation. The deadline there is the April 20th, 2016. So if you still have products on the market and you plan to keep them on the market as a manufacturer, you may have to react fast, unless you already did, to have your documentation updated, reviewed to ensure that it continues to conform and meet the CE mark requirement for the Europe. The next topic I want to jump into is the EN 55032. EN 55032 basically is the multimedia equipment standard. It covers the emissions aspect as covered by a multimedia equipment under the official journal. If you look at the history, historically, the multimedia equipment was divided into two main categories: audiovisual equipment, which was predominantly covered by CISPR 13, part of CISPR 13, which is basically sound and television broadcast receiver. Then other audio equipment was covered by EN 55103-1, which covers the emissions aspect. And the other, one more standard, one very important standard which comes in picture all the time is the EN 55022, which is the information technology equipment. Over the years, as technology have been evolving, we are seeing the products which will have more than one function, and we are seeing a lot more products where some of these functionalities are coming in a single product. There could be many examples out there. However, for several years, there have been efforts in the standard writing community, discussions there to combine the requirements to avoid any ambiguity as to which standard may or may not apply to cover the emission aspect of the multimedia equipment. So these efforts resulted in a new standard, which is EN 55032. In essence, this standard will replace the requirement by EN 55013, CISPR 22, and EN 55103-1. So as of March 15, 2017, these standards will cease to give, in essence, the presumption of the conformity. In other words, manufacturer will not be able to any longer declare compliance to their products to any of these standards past March 15, and they will have to have their documentation, their test reports updated to the new standard 55032. In many cases, they will have to go through some additional testing to ensure wherever there is a gap between their original testing versus the EN 55032, they bridge that gap by performing additional testing, have a new report, and based on that new report, they declare compliance to the EN 55032. So one more time, the drop deadline date there is March 5, 2017. Past March 5, nobody will be able to declare compliance to CISPR 13, CISPR 22, CISPR EN 55103-1. I already mentioned March 15 deadline date there. So all the products which will fall under CISPR 13, so on and so forth, they will have to refer back to CISPR 32 to maintain the compliance. And at the moment, the latest standard for latest revision for EN 55032 in the official journal is of 2012. Even though there is a new version of 2015 of CISPR 32 is already out there, however, that has not been harmonized. At the moment, it's not part of the OJ. There are minor differences between the requirements. Predominantly, the requirements remain as the same as the EN 55032 2012. So if you are declaring compliance to CISPR 32, you will have to declare compliance at the moment to 2012 version. Let's talk about which countries are accepting CISPR 32 or what we call EN 55032. So at the moment, Korea is accepting the KN version, which is their modified version of the CISPR 32. The main difference there is that the CISPR 32 talks about allowing two different measurement distances for radiation emission. They allow either a 3-meter distance or they allow a 10-meter distance. However, the Koreans insist on, as they have in the past, in the case of CISPR 22, that they will not accept radiation emission test results unless the testing is being performed in a 10-meter, at a 10-meter distance in a radiation emission chamber. Australia, New Zealand is another market segment where they are accepting their version of CISPR 32, which goes by Australia, New Zealand 32. The latest rev is the 2012. So these two nations, or I should say 3 nations, are accepting the CISPR 32, their own modified versions, which are practically the same as CISPR 32. Other nations like Japan, Taiwan, US, and Canada have not adopted to this. US always typically go by FCC Part 15 for the ITE equipment. However, as we all know that FCC Part 15 for radiation emission and conductive emission refers to for certain aspect of their testing to CISPR 22, so that have not changed as of today. We'll see how the US authorities, FCC, will adopt or not adopt to the new requirements, and that leads to some of other challenges which we'll talk in a little bit of time. However, the hope there is that the countries like Japan, Taiwan, and Canada will have their documentation updated, and they will refer to some version of some form of CISPR 32 fairly soon. If I do a very focused to the point comparison, focusing on the main changes between CISPR 32 and CISPR 22, obviously the main difference being CISPR 22 only covers the ITE equipment, whereas CISPR 32 or EN 55032 is supposed to cover multimedia equipment along with the audio video broadcast receiver, so on and so forth. So in other words, it's supposed to cover EN 55022, CISPR 13, EN 55103-1, so on and so forth. Now, there are some subtle differences for the folks who are familiar with the CISPR 22-like testing. Imagine you are testing a product which has, for lack of a better word, a server-like product or a computer, like a laptop, for example. And it has a LCD screen, a monitor. So as far as exercising the device, among other things, there is always discussion about how to exercise the monitor or the video card. So from that perspective, CISPR 22 recommended using scrolling H mechanism to fully exercise the monitor. Whereas EN 55032, it has a different requirement. It says, hey guys, you need to use color bars and some moving elements along with the color bar. So the question comes that for Canada, which refers to CISPR 22, we will be running radiation emission, for example, or we are talking about Japan, we are talking about Taiwan, we are talking about other countries which still refer to some form of CISPR 22 or EN 55022. So the discussion point is that shall we continue using scrolling H for that aspect of the testing, where some countries are still referencing to EN 55022, and switch to European requirement, Korean requirement, and or the Australian New Zealand requirement using color bars and the moving elements. So those are very interesting discussion going on in the industry. Many people are dealing with them differently. Some people will run a scan with scrolling age. Some other people will run a scan with the color bars and do a comparison on product by product basis to determine which one of them might be giving, for lack of a better word, the worst case scenario, and they will continue rest of their testing with that particular worst case scenario, and then declare that as one of these is the worst case, thereby it essentially meets the requirement for the other. Now, in terms of the network ports, historically, CISPR22 always said that your utilization or on Ethernet-like ports, RJ45 ports, should be greater than or equal to 10% on all the speeds if your product supports multiple speeds like 10 megabits per second, 100 megabits per second, or 1 gig, so on and so forth. However, if we go back to EN 55032, now the verbiage has been changed, and it only references to less than or equal to 10% utilization on 10 megabit speed only. So in a way, they felt that the highest emission would be yielded at the lower speed data speed, but there is obviously an ongoing concern if that will eliminate some of the frequencies which may show up on the higher data rates. From the CISPR22's perspective, that might be okay, but if we consider the requirements for FCC, where the need is to go up to 40 gigahertz in most of the cases, depending upon the EUT clock frequencies, then that does become a big issue. And in many cases, the labs will end up performing testing twice, adjusting the rate once for CISPR32 and other time, and for second situation for CISPR22. In one way, if we look at it, if we are following the CISPR22 method, that is not only covering CISPR32 method, but it will go above and beyond. So one approach could be that people still follow the network port utilization, the CISPR22 method. I mentioned earlier the measurement distance discussion always come in picture. Even though CISPR32 says testing for radiated emission electric field could be done at 3 meter or 10 meter distance, however, CISPR22 says the limits are defined for 10 meter. Even though in a portion of the standard, CISPR22 talk in terms of the higher ambient, it says, hey guys, if the ambience is too high, you can move your antenna for Class B equipment to 3 meter distance and apply distance correction factor formula to convert your results to the 10 meter, and they consider that an acceptable. You will find many different interpretations there. Some labs will do CISPR22 testing still even today at 3 meter distance. Some other labs will take very strict position and they will insist on doing the testing at 10 meter. Our friends in Korea, they insist on the testing, even though following CISPR22 to the 10 meter distance. They will not accept any interpretation which will allow them to take the 3 meter results. So when it comes to EN 55032 or KN32, even though standard allows 3 meter, the Korean interpretation, as we understand today, is that they will not accept any results for radiated emission unless the product is tested at a 10 meter distance. Another good point of discussion, which sometimes makes people wonder about the subtle differences, how at the end of the day they will impact anybody. The measurement difference point. Historically, many of the standards will, and if we talk from FCC's perspective, FCC refers to NCC 63.4 and NCC 63.4. Look at all the versions over the years, and the latest one, 2014 today, they talk about measuring distance from the boundary of the UT. CISPR language in the CISPR22 historically been from the front of the table, which is okay in a sense. However, if somebody is following CISPR22 method, in comparison to EN 55032 definition, the CISPR22 method becomes more stringent in a way because you are few centimeters close to the device compared to if you go by the boundary of the AUT definition. However, if we factor into those few centimeters or few inches, if I be more accurate, then the difference in the reading will not be any more than a fraction of the dB. So whichever approach one would take, it will hardly make a difference. If I continue with the comparison, looking at the test methods like conducted emission voltage, conducted emission common mode disturbance on the telecom port, or CEV telecom we call in the lab environment, and radiant emission electric field, all those test methods are practically the same between, from the Korean perspective, if I talk about that, between KN32 and KN22 perspective, they are practically the same. We just need to remember that for radiant emission, we will have to follow the 10-meter distance, which historically has always been the case for Korea. So from the Korean perspective, there is no change, no difference. So all those test methods will practically be the same going from KN22 to KN35. So if you are the manufacturer of the equipment who export your products to Korea, and you have been declaring your product compliant using the CAB process to KN22, and if you want to migrate to KN32, for you there may not be any additional testing requirement you may have to go through to ensure your reports are up to date and they are correctly referencing to KN32, so on and so forth, and then you'll be covered. Unless your product falls into a category where it may have a broadcast AM or FM receiver, then there might be some additional requirement for you to go through testing, and after the testing is done, to declare your product to compliance through the CAB process. The next standard which I want to talk about is the CISPR35 and KN35. We will look at some comparison tables. There are a few things which catch your eye and help you see what the main difference has been there and how it will impact your compliance overall. And at that point, we'll conclude our presentation. So as the status stands today, CISPR35 has not been adopted by European Union as a harmonized standard. So you will not find a reference on the OJ as of today. However, there is talk in the industry that it's going to happen fairly soon. The Korean authorities decided to take the lead on that, and they jumped on it before anybody else in the world did, and kudos to them for doing that. And they have adopted the CISPR35 as the KN version of the CISPR35. There have not been huge differences. If we draw a comparison with basically CISPR24 or EN55024, the hope there is that the European Union will adopt to CISPR35 fairly soon, since the EN55032 is going in effect as of March this year. So it will only make sense that they will have immunity standard to go hand in hand for an emission standard, which they have already put in place as a multimedia equipment emission requirement, basically. So it will create obvious confusions if we have emission standard for multimedia equipment and we do not have an equivalent immunity standard for multimedia equipment on the official journal for the European Union requirement. So I believe that confusion will remain there for quite some time until the European authorities accept it as a harmonized standard. And like I said, the hope there is that that will happen fairly soon. So talking about the KN35 and or CISPR35, it obviously covers the immunity requirement for a multimedia equipment. It will replace any requirement which were covered by CISPR20 or CISPR24. The multimedia equipment, the broadcast function, which was covered by the CISPR20, now will be covered by the KN32, KN35, and or CISPR35. I briefly mentioned already, the countries accepting CISPR35 is only at the moment is the Korea. The Korean authorities put in a notification to NIST somewhere I believe, November-December timeframe, where they notified all the cabs which were issuing the test reports to the Korean requirement in accordance with KN 2224 that as of 1st of 2016, they will no longer accept test reports to KN 22, KN 24. So almost all the cabs in USA, they rushed to work with their accrediting bodies and the NIST to have their scopes updated to adopt to KN 32 and KN 35. Other countries, as I mentioned, including European Union, are still reviewing the draft versions of CISPR 35, and we'll see how long it takes them to get adopted to their own requirements. If I do a comparison, as I mentioned, for various aspects of the CISPR 35 with their counterparts like CISPR 24, in these tables I have put them in as KN 35, KN, and KN 24, since my goal here was to also talk about how these changes will impact somebody going for Korean requirements, and they had tested their products for KN 24 in the past, and now they have to meet the new Korean requirements to KN 35. In essence, this argument will apply for both CISPR 24 and CISPR 35. Since CISPR 35 or EN 55035 argument is not very relevant, considering there is no version of CISPR 35 as EN 55055 as part of the official journal. So for me, it was more relevant to talk about that requirement as part of KN 35 and KN 24. So if you look at the requirements for power frequency, magnetic immunity, we keep looking at conductive susceptibility. Frequency ranges are the same, 80 Mach to 1 gig, 3 volts per meter. I'm sorry, I misspoke. The radiated susceptibility requirements, the frequency ranges are same, going from 80 megahertz to 1 gigahertz, 3 volts per meter. However, if we look at the spot frequencies from the KN24 to KN35 version, we see that 4 more the spot frequencies have been added to the KN35 version, which was provided to all the labs by the NIST, came from the translated version came from the Korean authorities. So they have added 1.8, 2.6, 3.5, and 5 gigahertz as additional spot frequencies, and the requirement there is to have the spot frequencies done at 3 volts per meter as well. So that is a significant change from the perspective that if your product is already compliant to KN24, or you had the testing done a few months ago and you are getting ready to go through the approval process, working with the CAB to have your reports submitted to the Korean authorities for the approval, they will insist on that your reports are in KN32, KN35 format, and at the same time they will ask you to go back, and if you have not already covered these spot frequencies, have your reports updated, additional testing performed in a nutshell to ensure that you can legally list all the spot frequencies have been tested and covered, and then present that report for the approval. So there's a little bit of additional work. Our estimate is that not more than 2-3 hours work, and you can ensure that your product is still in compliance. If I look at from the interface lines perspective, we don't see a whole bunch of changes there for conductive susceptibility, spot frequencies, practically the same. One may argue there are additional spot frequencies like 52 megahertz if we compare with the EN 55024. However, the Korean version, which was KN24, always had the 52 megahertz frequency as part of the clock frequency. So from that angle, there has not been a huge change there. Looking at the surges for different interfaces, there's practically not much of a difference. For example, if you have unshielded symmetrical cable, the test levels are actually lower from going from 1.5K, 1.5 and 4K to 1K and 4 kilovolt. If you have a coaxial cable, CISPR 24 or KN24 did not have a requirement, and if you have that sort of interface and you declare as a manufacturer as an outdoor line, then there is some additional testing, some additional work for there as well. So there are those kind of small changes which are very, very product specific. And before you go and make a determination whether additional testing may or may not apply, we highly recommend that you work with your lab, give them the detail of your product, copy of the older report, and let the lab go through, review your product detail, and then based on that, they will let you know whether if you had a coaxial line, whether it was outdoor line or not, and whether additional search may or may not apply to your product. In large number of cases, only thing you may have to do would be only the radius susceptibility, spot frequencies. Continuing along, if we look at the conductor susceptibility testing, frequency ranges are same. However, the KN35 version have made the requirement less stringent. So they have divided the frequency range from 0.15 or 150 kilohertz to 10 megahertz as a 3 volts per meter. They split the frequency range into 3 steps, and they have as a function of the as a logarithmic, they are lowering the level. In essence, they have make the requirement lot less stringent, especially toward the higher end of the frequency. Similar argument, the spot frequencies, if we are doing comparison with KN24, are the same, no changes there. Other requirements like surge, EFTV for the IO line remain the same. Talking about the AC power, again, the main difference, what we have seen would be that they have made the KN32 have made the conducted susceptibility requirement less stringent, and the injected level goes down as a function of frequency. As you go higher in the frequency, the level goes down. So in other words, if you tested your product to KN24 in the past and you are just changing, you're just trying to adopt to KN35, the way the testing was done in KN24 will be covering your requirement for KN35, since KN24 testing will be considered the worst case scenario. That pretty much covers all the changes in comparison with KN24 to KN35. My apologies, it took me a little longer than I anticipated. I thought I'll keep my talk to about 30 minutes. I hope it worked for everybody. These are some of the links which will take you to the Europa webpage. They will take you to the BSI webpage, which is a good source for getting the latest European standard. Senelec is another place to get the latest information, what is going on the OJ official journal. Similarly, ETSI gives you a lot of free standard which fall under the ETSI's domain. So these are some of the good links to keep you guys up to date. What's the activity on the standard on the European Union side? So folks, in a nutshell, we briefly talked about how the new legislative framework has impacted the EMC directive. We discussed that for the manufacturer, there's not a lot of changes. It's just a matter of paperwork in large number of cases. In some cases, if your testing was done a while ago, you may have to review the harmonized list to ensure that the standard change on the OJ did not impact any of the testing. In other cases, where applicable, you may have to update your documentation relevant to your operator's manual, so on and so forth. Similarly, there are more requirements, not on the manufacturer, on the notifying bodies, so their role has been more clearly defined and expanded in my view. We also talked about changes to CISPR32, KN32, KN35, and we did the comparison of CISPR32 with the CISPR22, CISPR13, and we did a comparison of KN24 versus KN35. So I hope some of these discussions, some of these comparisons were helpful to you guys, and it will help you successfully take your products through the compliance and put them on the market in a reasonable time frame. That's pretty much all I have for today. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. And if you guys have any questions, please ask away. Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, thank you, Asad. That concludes the presentation portion of the webinar. Tomorrow, an archived copy of the webinar will be available on our website. We will send a follow-up email with a link to this file. Now we will answer questions. If you have a question, please type it in the questions area of your control panel. For questions we can easily address now, we will read the question aloud and then give the answer. We already have a few questions in here, so just give us a second to get oriented and then we'll get right into them.
Okay. There are quite a few questions, so let me quickly get myself ready. So the very first question is about the notifying body number on the product, I believe, if I correctly understood the question. My take is, and the way I read the documentation is that in the past, if a manufacturer chose to go through a notifying body for a certain situation to get approval for their product, they will have to put the notifying body number on their product label along with the CE mark. Now, with the new requirements, CE mark has to go, of course, but the notifying body number does not need to be put on the label. The notifying body number will be put into DOC, basically. So that will signify putting in the DOC that a notifying body opinion was used to have the documentation reviewed, which in many cases give manufacturer a lot more peace of mind.